For the past 3 days, I haven't been able to sleep with the lights off. The first day I went to bed, turned off the light and saw a shadow come up in front of the door. When I turned the light back on, I heard a strange whisper, and the shadow was gone. I turned it back off, and there it was again, only closer. When I tried to turn it off for the 3rd time, the shadow was almost on top of me. For the past 3 nights, this has been happening constantly. I've searched the internet and couldn't find anything describing this. Now I'm starting to get scared because it's taking longer to disappear, or not going away at all. I don't know if I'll live one more night like this. All I know is that right now, as I sit here and write this, I can see its shape, slowly coming towards me, and the shadow is grinning.
When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up to a cool green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but it was boring. All day the 2 men tended their cows. At night they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas had an idea that changed everything.
"Let's make a doll the size of a man," he said. "It would be fun to make, and we could put it in the garden to scare away the birds."
"It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made the doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. Then they added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they also gave it Harold's name. Each morning on their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night, they brought him inside so he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They both would laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick him or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they were both sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like this stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you better eat it, or else." Then the 2 men would howl with laughter. One night, after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold," Thomas said. I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it." "How could he grunt?" Alfred asked. "He's just a sack of straw. It's not possible." "Let's throw him in the fire," said Thomas, "and that'll be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll just leave him behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on him." So they left Harold sitting in a corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. Now and then the doll grunted, but that was all. After a few days, they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold and were making those sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night, Alfred noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We've been up here on this mountain too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed up on the roof and trotted back and forth, like a horse on its hind legs. All day and all night long he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in a far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley that same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But when they had gone only a mile or two, they realized they had forgotten to bring the milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them, but the stools would cost a lot to replace.
There really is nothing to be afraid of, they told each other.
After all, what could a doll do?
They drew straws to see which one would go back. It was Thomas.
I'll catch up to you,
he said, and Alfred walked on toward the valley. When Alfred came to a rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun.
First, I need to apologize to you. I'm so sorry. I'm coming to you in my time of need. Please help me. Please listen to the end. That's it. That's all I ask. I don't know what to do or where to turn. Please, just help me. That's all I ask. My name is Andrew, and I'm a single father. I don't tell you this like it's some badge of honour. And I'm expecting cookies, milk, and chocolate-covered snowflakes, like most of the others in my social circle would. They want your pats on the back and recognition. I just want some of your time. I see fatherhood as a burden. Necessary, yes, but still a burden. My son's name is Jesse. He's 11. Jesse started the 5th grade this year, like any other kid would. There was a little bit of trepidation and lots of excitement. He was a happy-go-lucky sort of kid, full of life and energy. All that changed after he met Stan on Tuesday. Stan was a late addition to Jesse's class, a transfer student from another district. Jesse's teacher sat Stan next to Jesse. When I picked Jesse up after school on Tuesday, he told me that Stan was his new best friend. He wasn't acting like himself though. He was pale and sweaty. I took his temperature, but he wasn't running a fever. I asked about his day, and all he would tell me was that Stan was his new best friend. Stan's my new best friend, Jesse would say. I know. I can't wait to meet him, I'd say back. Dad, Stan's great. You should meet him. He's my new best friend. The best in the world. We must have had this same conversation 1,000 times that night. When I tucked Jesse into bed, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. He put his little hand in front of his face and wiggled his index finger, telling me to come closer. I bent over him and he put his hands to either side of his mouth. You know, the little kid way of telling a secret. Well, I turned my head and he whispered something into my ear that chilled me. At the time, I didn't know why it chilled me, but it did. He whispered, "You believe me, right, Dad?" I sat back up and looked down at him. "Believe you about what, bud?" "Stan," he said. Stan's my best friend. I nodded and took his temperature once more. Again, he wasn't running a fever. I went to bed, but couldn't really sleep that night. On Wednesday, when I pulled up to the school to drop him off, he got this really weird look on his face and told me that he didn't want to go in. "Are you feeling sick?" I asked. "No," he said. He was chewing on his bottom lip like crazy. This was something else I'd never seen him do. "No, I need to go to school." He opened the car door and got out. No goodbye. No I love you. Nothing. He trudged up the front steps of the school with his head down. I let off the brake and turned away to drive to work. A little boy was standing right in front of my car. 2 more seconds and I would have run him over. The boy was pale, with a mop of blonde hair that was almost white, and bright blue eyes. He knocked on the hood of my car twice, waved once, and walked up the stairs to school. When I picked Jesse up after school on Wednesday, he looked a lot better. He was a tiny bit paler than normal, but he seemed happy. He told me all about his day. He told me about dinosaurs and music and math, and then he told me about recess. And then, after math period, we had recess. "Dad, you'll never guess what I did today at recess." "Tell me," I said, smiling to myself as I'm driving. I'm thinking tag, football, keep away. All the things I remember the boys doing at recess when I was that age. Something benign, something normal. "I joined a church." I frowned. "A church? At recess?" Jesse nodded. "The Church of Stan." I thought it must be some sort of new make-believe game that the kids were playing. "What's the Church of Stan?" "It's Stan's church, Dad." Jesse laughed like I was the silliest person in the world for asking that question. "What do you guys do though? You know, as members?" "Lots of stuff. Today though, we just listened to Stan talk. He was saying some funny words and I got sleepy and dozed off. A bunch of us did. I pulled into the driveway at home and we got out." "Was that it?" I asked. Things sounded weird for sure, but the kids didn't seem to be doing anything wrong. "Stan gave us flyers too." Jesse pulled out a crinkled up piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a piece of manila paper with 3 words written in black marker. Church of Stan. Again, weird, but nothing wrong. I just thought the boys were playing make-believe. I was wrong. When I picked Jesse up after school yesterday, I could tell that something was very wrong with him. He looked panicked and scared. "What's going on, champ?" I asked, reaching out to feel his forehead. No fever. "We played the soul game today," he said. Jesse's head was on a swivel. He couldn't sit still. He kept looking all around as we headed home. "The soul game?" I asked. Jesse just nodded and kept trying to look everywhere at once. Beads of sweat dotted his upper lip. "What's the soul game?" Jesse shook his head no and said nothing. "Jesse, what's the soul game?" I told him I didn't want to, but he said he wouldn't be my friend anymore if I didn't play. "Who wouldn't be your friend? Where were the teachers?" Jesse started breathing harder, but still answered. "It happened in the church," he said. And then he whispered, "Teachers aren't allowed in the church." "The Church of Stan?" I asked. Jesse nodded, and a tear slipped down his cheek. What's the soul game, Jesse? I'm your dad. You tell me right now, and I'll take care of everything. I can't tell you. I can't. The rules are bad. They're so bad. What about Stan? I asked. Will Stan tell me the rules? No! Jesse screamed this and scared me half to death. Don't ask him the rules. Please don't, Dad. Please. I pulled into the driveway, scared and confused. Promise me, Dad. Promise me, promise me, promise me, promise me, please. Jesse was bawling now, terrified. I took him into my arms and rocked him. I hadn't rocked him like that since he'd been in kindergarten. He fell asleep in my arms, and I carried him inside. I took him straight to his room and got him ready for bed. He just needs sleep, I kept telling myself. All he needs is sleep. I put him to bed and ate dinner alone. I checked up on him around 9 when I went to bed. He seemed to be sleeping well, so I decided to go to sleep. I woke up to him screaming at the top of his lungs 18 minutes after midnight last night. I ran to his room, but he wasn't in his bed. I turned on the light, and Jesse came flying out of the closet like something was chasing him. He latched onto my leg and kept screaming. I tried to calm him down and ask what was wrong at the same time. He wasn't making any sense. He kept screaming about the soul game. He was impossible. I kept asking what that was, but he wouldn't tell me. I tried to put him back to bed, but he'd have none of it. Finally, I just took him to my room and he slept in my bed. He fell right to sleep. I was lying on my side, watching him, stroking his hair, when his eyes popped open and he stared right into mine. I'll tell you the rules after school tomorrow, mister, he said. Then he closed his eyes. What was going on with my kid? In the darkness, I stared at the ceiling for a long time before rolling over onto my side and staring into the bathroom. You know how when you're on the edge of sleep, sometimes your leg will kick and jerk you awake? Or you'll imagine that you're falling, or that you've just tripped over something and get jerked awake. That happened to me all last night. Only I kept being ripped from sleep by seeing something in the doorway to the bathroom. Every time my eyes would start to slip shut, I'd see the dark outline of something large in the doorway and wake up with a start. Of course, nothing would be there, and I'd start falling asleep again. The outline would appear in the doorway once more, but it would be closer to me, like it had taken a baby step. Over and over this happened until morning. This morning on the way to school, Jesse seemed out of it, lethargic. I felt the same way. I was even more exhausted. I thought of asking Jesse about what he'd said right before he fell asleep, but I couldn't. I was afraid it'd send him into hysterics again, so I left it alone. I drove him to school, and he didn't say a word the whole time. He was acting like a robot, listless, unemotional. I got a call shortly after dropping him off to come pick him back up. He'd vomited in class. When I picked him up, he was the same. I asked him several questions, but he only gave me grunts in response. The plan at home was to get him changed out of his dirty clothes and then take him to the doctor. He didn't say anything until we pulled into the driveway. "Can Stan come over today?" he asked. He stared out of the windshield at the garage door. You're not feeling well, bud. And do you really want him to come over? I wanted to meet this kid, but it didn't sound like Jesse wanted him over. I, however, wanted to get to the bottom of things. Yes, Jesse said. Okay, I said. Do you have his parents' number? He already asked his parents, and they said it was okay. We have to wait until he's out of class, and I'd still like to talk to his parents. Okay. Jesse got out of the car, and we walked into the house. I started to ask him how I was supposed to talk to his parents if I didn't have their number, but someone knocked on the door. I was still standing right next to it. I opened the door, and standing on my front step was the pale little boy with the blue eyes and mop of white blonde hair that I'd almost run over on Wednesday. A little girl stood next to him with the same complexion. Yes? I asked. Hi, Rue, the little boy said. Is Jesse home? The little boy standing on my front porch shouldn't have known that name. It was my nickname from college, created on a drunken night amongst my buddies, the second half of my name. No, I said. That's fine, the little girl said. My name is Devin, and you already know my brother's name. Stan, I said. The little girl covered her mouth and giggled. Stan smiled and shrugged. It's really quite simple. Rule 1. Don't walk past mirrors in the dark. Rule 2. Don't leave any doors open when you go to bed tonight. Ask your son what Rule 3 is. And remember, a creak means you're falling behind. A rustle means you've almost lost. When the lights go down, hopefully, you won't see the dark shadow standing in the corner of the room. Hopefully, you won't hear it breathing as your eyes shut and you begin to drift off. And if you hear a bang, well, hopefully you never hear a bang. Stan turned and walked away with his sister. I stared after them both and shook my head. I wouldn't play their stupid game. I walked into the house and found Jesse sitting at the kitchen table, crying. What's wrong? I heard a bang, he whispered. My mouth went dry. When does the game end? It doesn't. It never ends. My heart started beating faster. What's the third rule, Jesse? His face fell, and he sucked in a deep breath. Rule 3. Knowing all 3 rules makes you a player. My stomach dropped. What happens if you lose? When it's dark, you'll hear them coming. They like to let you know when they're getting close. Who? Stan and Devin, Jesse said. They'll reach out through the mirrors or open doorways and drag you through. How do you win? You win if you tell more people the rules to the soul game than the person that told you does. Like I said, listeners, I'm so sorry. But thanks for helping. Really. I'm going to enjoy my newfound freedom, and I hope that you enjoy your night. Give Stan and Devin my best.
Some of you may have heard that Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town. Yeah. Disney built the Treasure Island resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort, leave tourists there to relax in luxury. I mean, this is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yeah, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. And that's where the factual nature of the story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy, even though I guess both are convincing excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. Well, the concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, then you know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened/pursued by other animals, etc., etc. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land from the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes. They turned around, sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. And the land grabbed up by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern US. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed. The land was cleared. There wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney Media's holding and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So, anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed at the resort, the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with the influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down, nobody knew what the hell to think, but they were pretty happy about it. And Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. And I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from the Emerald Isle, so really I only heard the rumbling and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the shit he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably just had a hand in wrecking that place. People there felt just as angry about Treasure Island as folks did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there's rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there's anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not gonna say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place that had been scrubbed clean. Even odder was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody's spoken of the resort, but rather their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old-as-hell map that I had received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved into my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then, it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Hey." The drive took me through an inordinately large corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. And the gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers, eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap, with a hand-painted letter scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly, the handiwork of some local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants simply stood in their own stinking, bug-ridden refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotted wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Blue, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin, as bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. And the front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off their hinges, well, were stolen. Above the front doors were the gaping maw where they had once been. Someone had once again painted "Abandoned" by Disney. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen, as you might imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliance and space, no expense spared. Every glass structure was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. And the huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had rot upon every empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hooks swung in a random direction, but their movements were slow and small, that it was almost impossible to see, and I figured that it must have been caused by my footsteps. So I stopped one from swinging by clutching it with my fist, and then carefully let it go. But within seconds, it started swinging once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, some had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements, and there was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. I mean, it seems to me that they should have been shut off a long time ago. And there were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through all of them. So the few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or a radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper. And probably even my own breath just echoing in silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. It sounded like... I didn't believe it. Yes. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why, I thought there might have been some running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. And as I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 8 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell into the object in a perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and I snapped a photo, and then I stood on my toes and snapped another. And I moved closer again to get the details of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head and looked directly into my eyes, turned so that off the pedestal, across the grass and into the trees, all 8 feet of it, its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on my floor plan was the reptile house. Oh, I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and I should have known that they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. I took a few deep breaths and slapped to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled the wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with "Abandoned by Disney," that motto that I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. Using my camera flash as a sort of improv flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only. Thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would definitely have something interesting. And two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantonly steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually, that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall, something nobody else had apparently thought of, or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building that I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old static-filled television and long rotted-out food and drinks on the counter. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over. Papers scattered, almost melded with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush whenever I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words "Character Prep" stenciled in it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this is probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of this sense of excitement by a loud electric buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed up to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest that I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought that it would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the wall, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. These were an eerie rack of loincloths and native costumes on hangers towards the back. Now, what I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotted, shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should have been white, white where he should have been black. His normal red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took a photograph of the costumes hanging on the wall. Upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. And then I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bed-raggled character heads on a slick, grimy floor. I reached out for a headpiece of Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. And as I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet. And there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know? I mean, I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I'd need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, that photo-negative Mickey opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to his feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No, no, 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 no," over and over and over, with shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly. I managed to lift the camera, aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died. Went blank, quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey!" it said in a hush, perverted but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Wanna see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working it clumsily, clad fingers around its neck and clawing impatiently, movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws as it worked its digits into its neck. So much blood, so much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh, only cared about getting away. Above the doorway, out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. "Abandoned by God." I never got the picture out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, I fled for my sanity, if not my very life. I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anyone like that getting out.
Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake, so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they only had microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water, and a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test, and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began whispering into the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about his behavior is how the other captives reacted to it. Or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming then promptly stopped. So did the whispering in the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at very heavy levels of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced,
We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom.
To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice respond, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out amongst the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever. So did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightfully call the state that any of them were in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chest, stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that had been ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still, many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber, and begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having an artery in his leg severed by one of the subjects' teeth. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative, and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one of the doctors. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he bled out, to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeating one word: more, over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room in the facility. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative that they had given him to prepare him for surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding his wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and shut, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to the skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, that they try the surgery without anesthetic, and the subject did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically impossible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, and the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be of some drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple. 2 words. Keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subject could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds again. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point, all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might. First left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for the EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatline inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on papers scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwave showed the same flatlines as the one who just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So